essential facts of the Torah. Does that mean that there are no questions? No, there are questions. But for every question so far, there's been an answer. And there will be answers to the other things. And the same thing is true regarding evolution. Evolution, that's the buzzword. Rabbi, you don't understand evolution. Evolution is necessary for medicine. Evolution is what gets us vaccinations and gets us advances in understanding by, molecular or biology and so on and so forth. There's a difference between a bacteria evolving and developing a defense mechanism against an antibody that destroys it. That's an evolvement, but it's an evolvement that's slight, because if you have a poison that will kill the bacteria can develop a very slight change and alteration. That'll block out the poison, but that doesn't make it a non-bacteria. It's still a bacteria that has developed an ability to withstand certain toxins. And the same thing is true with vaccinations. The same thing is true with all different kinds of things that are the development of strains of bacteria and other things that allow us to have advances in medicine and advances in biochemistry, advances in the health of people. But those changes are micro changes within the organisms that is there potentially. And they give you the idea, the whole story of the finches that happened with Darwin. The finches that happened with Darwin were still finches. Their beaks changed, the muscular structure of their beaks had to change in order to support the different types of food that they had, because this was something that they had to have had within themselves before. Because if it was going to be from a mutation, it wouldn't have happened in 17 years. You can't predict a mutation. Mutations come from heaven, and it takes supposedly millions of years to develop, or hundreds of thousands of years. It doesn't develop in 17 years. You have to say that the organism had the potential to adapt and to deal with it. My hands are almost exactly the same size now, my right hand and left hand. However, I'm right-handed. And when I did a lot of work with my right hand was considerably bigger than my left hand. Today, because my right hand doesn't work that much more, the right hand and the left hand are almost exactly the same. Our biologies change according to the needs, but that's something that's already existing, pre-existing within ourselves. To go from one species to the other, to go from molecules to multiple celled animals is a totally different thing. Now, somebody has sent me a video that they have these single cells that became cluster cells. You looked at the video, the single cells became cluster cells in clusters, but it did not become one organism. It became a composite of cells clustering together. To become a multi-celled organism is a huge jump, which doesn't happen because you've introduced a predator. And those studies are flawed studies. It only shows you that the single-celled animal had the ability of sticking together with itself. In fact, they've had all different kinds of explanations why this happens, why single cells come together in the forms of sponges, where really each cell by itself is a living entity unto itself. It's not really one big entity, but it's many different entities working and in proximity to each other. But it's not macroevolution changing from single-celled animals to multiple-celled animals, to cockroaches, to dogs, to humans. It's just not what's happening out there. Another thing that you have to realize, as I told you before, mutations are random. If they are random, they have to be possible at all times, equally. So if something was possible several million years ago, it should have been possible many, many different times along that timeline, and should have created intermediate species, intermediate entities along the way. And we should have had many, many closer existences than the big chasm between men and apes. There should have been apes that looked almost human, and more human, and less human, and more like because there should have been along the way many, many, many intermediaries. It's not one intermediary. And so, what has happened in the field of evolution, understanding evolution, from one existence that it develops into having augmented different abilities, those are within the organism itself. But that's an evolution within the organism, not from one organism to another, not from molecules to man, and which is a totally different possibility. And that, my friends, is mathematically impossible. And I again repeat to you, Dr. Lee Spetner, Dr. Avram Michal Hassifer, Professor Hassifer and Professor Spetner have shown the improbability, the impossibility of these things of ever happening, because the amount of changes are so unbelievably large and would take such an unbelievable amount of years as to be mathematically impossible. And they've never been addressed. You know why they've never been addressed? Not because they've been disproven, but because biologists can't deal with mathematics and can't deal with the truth of those statements that microevolution is totally different from macroevolution, and that evolution by itself is not a fact, as Stephen Gould says. It's a fact that things adapt, but that things change. There has never been any evidence of that. Certainly not evidence of the radical changes that we're talking about.